my welcome everyone to my office hours for every Thursday at 10 a.m. We are right here. So happy that you guys are joining me here today. I'm here almost every single Thursday, adding a new one today. So normally we're just on YouTube, but I'm also on LinkedIn and Twitter this week. So if you're joining us from there, definitely let me know. Drop your questions down in the chat. And before we get started, I do want to give a quick little last shout out for an event that I'm doing tonight. So if you're local to the Sacramento area, I'm doing an event at Inno Grove Co-working in Elk Grove called Your Business Model is Garbage, but we're going to fix that. And the idea here is to how you can use design thinking to develop the strongest possible business model for your startup. It's going to be a lot of fun. Link is down in the description. Okay, so without further ado, we're doing something a little bit different today. And then because I'm in the mood for business models, I've kind of broken down our questions in advance into how we go about the process of picking the right business model. So that's a big question, but I'm going to do this in using three different tools. So that's kind of how we're going to talk about it. We're going to talk about how you pick the right business model in a sequence of three tools. That's what I've done 100 times with startups. So I'm gonna let you in a little secret. Good morning, June. Thanks so much for joining. Glad to have you here today. For if you guys are working on something fun, definitely let me know, because I'm really curious, and tell me what business model you have. But let's get started. So the idea here of how you pick a business model is really going to start with what a business model is. And I know that seems kind of self-explanatory, but it's actually not. So most of the time when I ask somebody, what's your business model? They say, oh, we charge a monthly subscription. And that's actually confusing the business model with the revenue model. So those two are not the same thing. So the revenue model is an important component to a business model, but a business model is actually four different things all at once. So the very first tool, if we want to just get on the same page about what a business model is to use what I call, or what's called the magic triangle. Okay, and so I'm going to show it to you now. Here's the magic triangle, and I'll just get rid of this link here. But rtbx.link/magic triangle if you want to access this little image that I have right here. Otherwise, you can take a screenshot. Okay, so it's a triangle with four components on it. It seems super straightforward, super self-explanatory, even super dumb, but that's actually its advantage. So let's start with the simple and then go to the complex. So starting with the simple, we have at the very center of the triangle, because we are talking about design thinking, we have who is the customer. So that's the most important part. Any business model begins with a customer who has a particular problem. They have demographics, psychographics, all kinds of stuff. But right at the middle is who is the customer. And then we have three things that we connect to a customer. So we have what value we're delivering. That's up there at the top of the triangle. What value we're delivering. That's our value proposition. It's our offering. It's our product. It's that kind of thing, right? It's what is our value proposition. And what value are we creating for the customer? And then down in the bottom right-hand side of the triangle, we have how are we delivering that value? So this is your value chain, your value network. It's a combination of channels and all kinds of things. But as you are creating value for this customer, but you have to get it to them somehow. So if you're a physical good, it could be selling it in the store. It could be e-commerce. If you're creating an app, right? So that is its own value chain, is the creation of an app and launching that at an app store, a mobile app. SaaS, like a web app, there's some way this value that you're creating is getting delivered to the customer. So how are you doing that? And then finally, in the bottom left of the triangle, we have why does this make money? Not how do you make money, but why does this make money? And so that's a combination of the revenue logic, but also your operating expenses and everything else. And when you couple that with the size of the market, it's why does that make money? Why is this going to work? Okay, so that's the simple, self-explanatory kind of part of the business model triangle, the magic triangle here. But there's actually something that's really interesting when you start looking at it, because these four components all connect with the customer at the middle, which means if you go to start tweaking one of these, you can see that it's touching the three others, which means if I were to go say, okay, instead of doing say a monthly subscription model. I'm going to change this to quarterly payments that are larger, but it's cheaper over the course of the year, but they're still large. And so kind of changing the revenue logic. Really simple, super minor change. But that actually is going to impact the customer because you're asking for a larger amount of money up front. And so you may be, for example, meeting a more affluent customer. You're not necessarily true, but you could be needing something that's a bit more, somebody who has a bit more money available. If you go and change how you're delivering that value. So for example, if you switched from something that's just sitting on a shelf at Target, at your local Target, to something that you buy in this specialty store online, you are changing the customer. But importantly, you're probably also changing the pricing, right? Because it's going to take a different amount of money to offer that, which also might be reinforced by a change in the value proposition, because we're probably offering something that at least we're selling as more luxury, more upper end, right? More concierge. And so that's going to command the higher price, and therefore the special store, and there's exclusivity with that, which does change the value proposition and changes the customer. So always start with just the 4 basic components before you break down all the detail. Like, we'll get to the business model canvas, that's tool number 3. But before you get to anything detailed like that, just what are these 4 basic components? Because that's where we really want to start. Okay, so that's the first tool, is just to get an understanding of exactly how your business is hypothesis at least structured, is out the gate. Thank you, June. Yes, why does money is a great question, and I assure you, not enough startups actually ask this question. Oh, my buddy Dan. Good morning. Good morning, Dan. Glad to have you joining us here today. Okay, so now we have a basic business model, super core, super basic, 4 components. But you know what? That is all that goes into a business model. You take any other tool out there, and it may be putting more detail on those 4 boxes, but it's still the 4 boxes. It's still 4 components, because the business model is always who, what, how, and why. Always. Okay. All right. So now we have this like basic hypothesis. It might not be the right one, but we have an hypothesis. Now it's time to surface as many other hypotheses as we can, because, and this I cannot emphasize enough, a lot of early stage startups, they latch onto a business model that never changes until the market just bitch slaps them around, right? With low sales or bad reviews or whatever, because they never had the right business model in the first place. So you're doing SaaS, monthly subscription, done, right? Or somebody will say, I'm doing an app, therefore I'm having a per app download charge, or I'm doing ads, right? Whatever it is, they end up latching on to some business, some revenue logic in there that's impacting the whole business model. And then that acts as an anchor to keep the business model from evolving as you get more data as you go on. So I strongly encourage a really like intense exploration of business models. And there's a tool that can really help out here. So this is actually really fantastic. There's an accompanying book that goes along with this called the Business Model Navigator. And I do recommend the book, although the book is not targeting startups, but it's actually got a lot of information in it. But this link here will take you directly to the site that has all 55 known business model patterns just listed there with examples and everything. I'll show you kind of what that looks like in a second. But the idea here, what do you mean there are only 55 patterns? Well, the idea is that if you go back all the way to the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, 90% of all of the world-changing innovations that we've seen have been recreations of a pattern that already existed. There were already existing business models. Only 10% of the world-changing inventions and innovations from the beginning of the Industrial Revolution to today actually involve the creation of a new business model. Quick story as a quick aside before I move on. So we often talk about like the razors and blades business model, right? And that comes from the idea of King Seth Gillette in around 1901, 1902, somewhere in there, launched a new way of doing razors. So it was a razor that you would sell once, but the blade itself would be what you would swap out. So you could charge a premium or even maybe at a loss for the upfront razor, but then you're collecting revenue over time. So you're ensuring that people keep coming back to pay more. And that actually wasn't original either, even though we call it razors and blades, because there was actually heat lamps that were sold the same way. So you buy the actual lamp and then you buy the oil ongoing over time. So it's been around for a bit here, but we call it the razors and blades model. That was brought back, the razors and blades model was brought back later with inkjet printers. Inkjet printers were the same way. You bought the printer and it was usually pretty cheap, right? But then you'd pay just exorbitant amounts for these cartridges over time, so they'd keep you coming back for more money. When the iPod launched, right, in what was that, around the year 2000, 1999, something like that. When the iPod launched, it was not the first MP3 player, right? It was not the first MP3 player. But what they did was say, we're going to create this MP3 player, but we're going to connect it to iTunes. We're going to give you a way of getting music through our store onto the app. So you have one upfront purchase for the iPod, and then you have ongoing purchases for music onto the iPod. It's razors and blades. It had been around for like 120 years at that point. The biggest, greatest innovations out there that changed the way we do things all come back to prior patterns. And your startup is going to too. So what you can do is actually go to the business model navigator website here at that link and actually browse through all 55 patterns. And if you were to click on any of these, you can see some examples and some descriptions. It's a little dense. It's not super user friendly, but hopefully it'll give you a little bit of understanding of how this can work. So, and most businesses actually use a combination of business models, right? But we have like this is the top of the list, but like an add-on, right? Which is where you have a core offering, but then you sell, little bolt-ons that you can get for an additional fee, right? Or hidden revenue or revenue sharing is another thing where you get partners on board, and because they bring in your customers, they get a share of the revenue. Again, 55 business models. So what you should do is take your triangle, lay that out in front of you, go through the list of 55 patterns, one after the other, turn off your internal filter and just overlay that pattern onto your triangle and see what happens. So, okay, this has to do with the value chain and the customer. So I'm going to tweak those. That probably means the price is going to have to go up. And okay, boom, hypotheses, right? Come up with 10, 15 different hypotheses for what your business model could look like to deliver the kind of value that you want to deliver. And then start to filter them down and see which ones are good. If you create 10 or 15, most of them are going to suck. Few of them are going to be meh, but there's going to be a couple in there that you didn't think about. They're going to give you new ideas that you can go out and validate. All right, so browse through the patterns and try to find ways to doing that. Okay, so at this point, you should have gone through like your magic triangles, basic core components, you have, who, what, how, and why. And then you went through business model patterns and you came up with all kinds of different ways to do the same thing. So now you have a bunch of different stuff sitting in front of you. Now you can move on to what we all kind of associate with business models, which is the business model canvas. And this is the one that everybody's probably most familiar with. So I don't want to spend too much time on it, but I want to give just a super quick walkthrough of the business model canvas. So it's 9 boxes on a grid. On the right-hand side of the canvas, we have what happens outside the company with the customer. On the left-hand side of the canvas, we have the internal parts of our company. And then gluing those two things together, we have value propositions right at the middle. So we just kind of go around in a circle. So outside the company, we have customer segments that you're serving. You may have more than one, but you got customers. You have established some kind of relationship with those customers. Is it completely self-service, like a SaaS product where you literally never encounter a person? Or is it a concierge service where it's high touch and intimate, like Dan runs with Miramar, right? Or is it something kind of in between? And there are all kinds of different and interesting relationships that can come out of that. And if we want to talk more about those, because it's often neglected, we can actually break those down. One of my favorites is actually like a co-creation relationship. This is YouTube. So if you're watching on YouTube right now, YouTube is a co-creation relationship because YouTube is delivering me value by allowing me to watch all of these videos. But what they're doing is allowing users to add to the value of the YouTube platform by producing content that I want to see. Right. And a lot of those creators aren't paid for them. Some creators are, of course, there are ways to monetize on YouTube, but a lot of creators aren't paid for that. Another example of that is on Amazon. Amazon is valuable not only because you can go on Amazon and buy goods and maybe get Prime delivery, but if you are just like standing in a Best Buy or something and you're looking at a device and you want to know, is this a good device? What do? You go look on the reviews on Amazon. And those reviews are all coming from people. So they have a co-creative relationship with their people, where they're increasing the value of the Amazon offering by the relationship through customer reviews that they're establishing with their customers. It's pretty cool. So relationships you establish, you have channels, right? This is how you're actually getting to your customers. So we're breaking down the how component of the triangle here, or at least the customer side of the how. So where are your customers at each stage of the life cycle, from awareness all the way through post sale? And then of course you're charging money somehow. So at the bottom right there, we have revenue streams. On the inside of the company, just kind of switching to the other side, you have key partners, suppliers, that kind of thing. You have all the activities that you have to perform in order to deliver on the value. You have whatever resources that requires, and all that costs money. So you have a cost structure, and then gluing all that together is the value proposition. That's what value you're creating for the customer at the end of the day. So what you could do now that you have a business model is you can break that more down into all this kind of detail and really just juice out all of the nitty-gritty little details. This is not like one little sentence in each of these boxes. You could write essays on the mechanics of your business model for each of these 9 boxes. There's a lot to go on here, so don't be shallow. So you go in and you fill this whole thing out. And then what you have is just a big bag of assumptions. So you have assumptions about your customer, you have assumptions about your value, you have assumptions about your cost structure, you have assumptions about your pricing model, you have assumptions about all this stuff. And what you can do is now find the riskiest assumption in there. And that's the first thing that you go test. So to kind of go all the way back to the beginning, the way that I tackle the process of designing business models with startups is to start with just, what do we know right now? What are we thinking it is? Because this came from some kind of idea. So there's a customer with a problem. We think we're going to solve it in some way. We're going to deliver it to them somehow. And this is why we think it's going to make money. So we start with that. And then we go through and expand, create a bunch of different ideas for ways that we can layer on other kinds of business models on top of this one, to come up with just all this kind of just a whole set popcorn bag of examples that we can pick from, and then filter down and evaluate. And we come up with one that we think is the most reasonable based on whatever we know right now, which honestly is probably not that much, right? We're probably using intuition and metaphor and simile to say, like, I think this is probably the right one, but we pick the right one to go with. And then we break that down in a lot more detail with the business model canvas. And now we have a really well-defined business model that tells us everything we need to do, because now we can go through and say, all right, our riskiest assumption is that customers want this, or that customers will pay for this, or that they'll pay in this way for this, so that we can reach them through these channels. There's some assumption that it is the most critical right now, meaning you have the least amount of data for it, and it's most important to the success of your business model. And you find which one that is, and then you go and run an experiment. And that's a topic for another time. But then you go and run an experiment on that, and that's the first thing that you do. And if you know, all this can happen inside of one day. So all these people are like, oh, I can't, like take any steps on this until I, do all this. No, you can get started on a startup today with a very robust business model. It's not operational yet, but a very robust business model and a path to test it inside of a day, just by being methodical. Start simple, come up with a bunch of different ideas. This is design thinking 101. Filter those things down, go deep, then surface back up and say, okay, what are all of my assumptions? So we're doing divergent thinking again. All these assumptions, here's the one that I'm going to test. And now we go test it. And then we circle back again and say, what did we learn? Okay, here's what we learned. And we go through that build, measure, learn loop over and over and over again. And that's kind of it. That's really, really just it. Like, business models actually are nowhere near as complicated as we make them out to be. So this general topic is one that I really, really like, and I could dive deep on any one of these, because it's actually a subject I'm really passionate about. I love business models, which is why people end up calling me the shredder of business models. It's because I spend so much time talking about them. And so what I'm going to do tonight at the workshop is we're going to go through the process of actually, we're not going to use these tools. We don't have that time. It's it's an hour and a half workshop. So instead of like breaking down through these tools, we're going to say, what do we know right now? How do we articulate that? Where can we get additional clarity? Find out what we know and don't know. And then we're going to say, here's what's going to happen next. So that we can go from, I think I know my business model, to clearly articulating my business model, and say, what's the weakest part of my business model? And here's how we're going to go test it. And that's the path that startups have to follow in order to create really compelling business models. So that's kind of all I've got to say today. So I think I'm going to go ahead and call it here, unless there's some critical questions you guys want to ask. So a couple of quick things. I'm normally here every Thursday. I won't be here next Thursday, taking a week off. So I won't be around then, but I'll be back on June 2nd for another edition of Office Hours. Again, same links, same time. So right down here. And if you want to ask a question in advance, hit up this link here. It's also down in the description. You can record a video and I will play it during here as we did last week. Of you asking your question, and then I'll react to it in real time. So with that, if you had fun, give a like, and I will see you guys soon. Thanks so much, and see you around, guys.